to know how to negotiate a successful lease agreement for your new restaurant or food business, stay tuned and we're going to take you through our step-by-step guide to the top tips for negotiating a successful lease agreement for your new business. Now, if you'd like to hear more about how you can open a successful cafe or restaurant, make sure you press the notification and subscribe button, and every week you will be notified when we drop a new video. Hi, I'm Rowena. I'm from Food Marketing in Sydney, Australia. We're a food-based consultancy who work with cafes and restaurants and other food-based businesses to really skyrocket their sales. So stay tuned for our tips on negotiating a cracking lease for your food business. Now, negotiating a successful lease for your business is absolutely crucial to the long-term sustainability of your business. Now, before we get into our top tips for negotiating, the one thing I'd like to start by saying is really understand your obligations with the lease. Really make sure you know and understand what the lease is specifying. It's not just about base rent. You might have to pay ongoing costs, like if you're in a shopping centre, there might be marketing costs. You might have outgoings, like water and electricity and gas. There might be clauses like make good clauses which return the property to its original condition. So if you've spent a whole lot of money putting in an expensive fit out at the end of the lease, if you're not continuing with the lease, you will have to spend tens of thousands of dollars having that fit out removed. So before we proceed about the top tips for negotiating a cracking lease, I would really like to remind everyone you really understand what the lease is specifying and saying. And the easiest way to understand your lease obligations is have it reviewed by a lawyer. Okay, so our top tips for negotiating a successful lease for your new food business or your restaurant, cafe, whatever it might be. Tip number one is have a rental budget in mind and really stick to it and be prepared to walk away. So to give you an idea of what you can afford, when you're doing your numbers and projections for your new business or when you're moving locations with an existing business, the rule of thumb is you really don't want to be spending more than 15% of your turnover on your rental costs, because what you'll find otherwise is the business is not sustainable. By the time you add in your cost of goods sold and your wages and all the other costs associated with running a business. So try to stick to under 15% of your projected sales, create yourself a budget and don't deviate from it, and then you won't get yourself into financial stress. Okay, before we continue, what type of tricks have you used when negotiating leases before? Pop your thoughts in the comments and let's have a look at what's working for other people. Okay, when you go to negotiate about a lease, what you want to do is reflect on the attributes of the location and make sure that the attributes of the location match what you have already determined are the attributes that you need to be able to run your business successfully on that site. So for example, what are the must-haves and what are the non-negotiables for a location? If you start looking at premises that don't meet your needs, you need to walk away. Stick to your guns, make sure you find something that really suits your purposes before you even start to negotiate. Okay, tip number 3 is actually a really simple tip. Know who you are negotiating with. Often who you're negotiating with is actually an agent, they're not the landlord, and often they are not authorized to negotiate on behalf of the landlord. So ask the question, and you know what? If you don't ask, you don't get. So if you want to negotiate directly with the landlord, if you feel like the agent is not listening to you and not open to negotiation, request a meeting with the landlord. They can only say no. Okay, tip number 4 is absolutely crucial. You need to research the market. You need to be negotiating and looking at a number of different sites at any one time so that you can walk away. People get emotionally invested in locations and they decide this is the location that I just have to have, it's perfect. And they lose all their powers of negotiation. Don't get emotional. Determine if there are other alternatives out there, and also determine what the market value is for the location. When your judgment gets clouded by emotion, you're often willing to pay more just to secure a location. So make sure you're not getting clouded, do your homework, research the market, and know what that location is really worth. Okay, tip number 5 is a great tip. It's all about looking around you at similar businesses that are operating near to the location you're looking at. Look at how busy they are, determine the average transaction value. You can do that by being a paying customer yourself and keeping your eyes open. Look how much people are spending, track the number of people that are coming in and out through the door, and then you will decide whether your budgets for the location you're looking at are really reasonable. Okay, tip number 6 is a really interesting one. Always ask for a rent-free period for when you're actually doing your fit out after you've signed your lease. Now, this is interesting because a lot of people don't do it. If you don't ask, you don't get. You never know. The landlord might be under pressure. They might be so happy to secure a regular paying tenant that they're happy to say, okay, I'm going to give you a rent-free period for a month while you fit out your restaurant or a cafe. This is going to make a big difference to you if you're not spending a whole lot of money on rent before you're generating any revenue. Okay, tip number 7 is a really interesting one, and in keeping with the don't ask and you don't get theory, tip number 7 is ask for a contribution cost. Now, this is commonplace in many parts of the world, but it might be new to many of you. Ask the landlord for a contribution of, say, 10%, that is an industry norm, towards the cost of your fit out. We all know fit outs cost an absolute fortune, and a lot of people overspend on fit outs because they start working on a premises and there ends up being problems with wiring and plumbing, and then there's arguments with landlords and costs start blowing out. So before you ever sign the lease, let's talk to them about contribution costs. And I tell you what, if you don't ask, you don't get. Okay, tip number 8 is all about confirming that you are going to take possession of a site. So after you've done all your research, you've weighed up the pros and cons of multiple locations, you've negotiated to a point that both parties agree and you're happy. Once you get verbal agreement, make sure you get something in writing ASAP. Now, a memorandum of understanding will ensure that you know where you stand, you're not going to lose the site, and you can confidently continue planning your business to operate on that site while lease agreements are being drawn up. Final tip for today, tip number 10, is about permitted usage. So permitted usage is going to tell you what you can and cannot do with the site. It's also going to tell you how you can operate, right down to potential menu items. So it's really important that your permitted usage allows you to operate your concept that you've already determined that you would like to operate on that site. It's absolutely crucial. If you sign a lease that does not you're not fully versed in the permitted usage clause, you could find yourself in a position where you've signed a lease where you can't operate the business on that location. It's there in black and white. A lot of people miss it in leases. So make sure you know and understand your obligations regarding permitted usage. Is so important. Now, if you'd like to access our lease negotiation checklist, make sure you click the link below and download the tool, and it's absolutely fabulous. It's a checklist that will take you step by step, all the key considerations when you go to negotiate over a location for your new business. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you press subscribe so you get weekly notifications for every time we post a new video. You can also follow us on Facebook, where we're always posting up-to-date information pertinent to the F&B industry.